an Ayurvedic health counselor, and you're so exposed to the idea early on that your gut health is such a big part of your overall health. But you're so right that until we see it in the research and the science and beyond the anecdotes, we don't fully comprehend these ideas. And so you're accelerating that research now. What would you say were the biggest challenges you saw when you entered the medical field in research and in our treatment of diseases?
So I had entered the field in the early 1970s for 20 years, but I was primarily a donor, etc. And as I mentioned, science was not moving fast enough to save my father's life. So I, in 93, decided I couldn't help others if I couldn't help myself. And I first had to survive. But there were those three elements. One, teamwork, partnership. So I went to this MD Anderson, and the two leading cancer centers off and on rated in the world were either MD Anderson or Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. One in Houston, one in New York. And I noticed there was no one from Memorial Sloan Kettering at the cancer conference in Houston. And I told the person putting the conference on, why is there no one here from Memorial Sloan Kettering if we're trying to accelerate research? And he told me he viewed Memorial Sloan Kettering as a competitor. And I told him not to the patient. So therefore, once we promised funding for research in this field, we would only fund if you shared all your data. And I eventually got on my board Andy Grove, who was the CEO of Intel. And we worked on, this is early technology with computers and connecting, that we would connect all of our researchers digitally together. And it might be easier for someone at MD Anderson to talk to someone at Memorial Sloan Kettering via technology than someone else to find at MD Anderson. But we told them that we couldn't fund any of their research unless they shared their data. Now, some people told me, well, I have to wait for Nature or Cell magazine to come out. The story will be out in a year. And we told them that their research was so important that they didn't need any of our funds. Our funds were only for those who were willing to share. And I would say within 6 months, everyone in the world was willing to share. And no matter how much we raised in money, I was out there first recruiting the best and brightest, and second, trying to convince people who were thinking of leaving the field to stay in the field. And I wrote in the book a little bit about an individual who was being recruited to make better apples. And I was successful in convincing him that we could live and still eat the same apples for maybe the next 20 years, but people being diagnosed with cancer throughout the world and the fact it was going to be increasing, not decreasing, we couldn't wait for solutions. And then the other element I would say to you was government. There is no individual, there is no foundation, my family foundations, which were created, and today there's, with our centers, more than 10 of them, nor Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, the Gates Foundation, plus Warren Buffett, which is the largest foundation today in the world. The amount of money they have is small relative to the government. So if you can redirect the funds of the government, you now have access to hundreds of billions of dollars that could be redeployed. And so we spent 2 to 3 years making the economic argument of what the elimination of cancer was. But one of the challenges, when you talk about challenges, we were not able as a country to increase significantly our investment in the National Institutes of Health, the largest medical research group in the world. And I discovered in my analysis that one of the reasons was there were 500 different diseases constantly appealing for more funds. And so, unlike a laser, you had all these voices out there, whether it's Parkinson's, whether it was Alzheimer's, whether it's diabetes. There wasn't a focused request. And so, beginning 2 years later in 95, I went to the various disease-specific groups and said, if you will stand down, we will have a combined effort focused on cancer, all cancers, like a laser, to double the NIH budget. And we will work on that. And when it's doubled, all medical research will double, not just cancer. And they agreed. And so we put on a march. It took 3 years and all this data, et cetera, to show and interacted with our political leaders that this would be one of the best investments the country could make. And the leaders in the world in the 22nd century will be the leaders and the 21st century in bioscience. And so with the march concluding in 98, the President of the United States shortly thereafter signed into law what became the doubling of the NIH budget. There's been an incremental $500 billion in basic research spent. It laid the groundwork for what we did to get a quick solution for COVID-19. Every disease has benefited from it. The financial commitment was $10 million in the march. Today, there's a $500 billion payoff. So the first efforts of individual philanthropy, the efforts of recruiting young scientists to work in the field, which is probably the highest rate of return in any philanthropy that I've seen. The cause of teamwork was coupled now with the increased benefit of getting the government focused on this area.
Wow, and I want to read out, this is on page 111 of the book, where you talk about a new type of organization and you lay out these, very clear principles that you're just speaking about right now. So as you said, recruit the best and brightest scientists and physicians, focus on the career paths of these young investigators, require collaboration in place of competition, build cross-sector ties, identify the most promising research not funded by the NIH, eliminate needless bureaucracy, and the list continues. And I mean, you make it sound so easy when I'm listening to you right now and when you read it like this, but I'm imagining that each one of these items took a lot of effort, time, energy. I mean, you make it sound so seamless, but I would love to know, like, how challenging is it to galvanize at such a large scale and level?
So if you were at a Parkinson's Foundation or a Diabetes Foundation and thousands of talented people tried to increase funding, but it was like there was a zero-sum game. If I increased funding for diabetes, I had to take it away from someone else. And so getting them to accept that they were unsuccessful and to stand down and have faith, it's somewhat based on past performance in the financial investment they want in business. They want to know, okay, what's your past performance? Do you have a track record? So we had a track record of success to build on. And we didn't ask them to stand down for their lifetime. We just asked them to stand down for a few months here so we could focus like a laser our attention on this issue. Eliminating cancer as a cause of death and bringing in the leading economists in the world was worth $50 trillion to the U.S. economy in the early 1990s, multiples of what the economy. And so we could show the results. And so, yes, you have to have a past track record. Convincing a person not to change their career. I remember one of the world's leading chemists was about to be given a job as the dean of the most prestigious university in the world, but he would leave the laboratory. So I went and asked him, who's running Warner Brothers? At the time, it was two friends of mine, Terry Semel and Bob Daly. He had no clue who was running. I asked him, has he ever heard of Steven Spielberg? And he says, yes, he's heard of Steven Spielberg. I said, well, if you become the dean, no one will ever hear of you, because Steven Spielberg took years to make movies and product. You're working on breakthroughs here in bioscience. That might change the world. You becoming a manager of others might never change the world. And so luckily, he decided to stay. When you think of young scientists, the hundreds or thousands that I've dealt with, you graduated high school, you were 17 or 18 years old. You're now 31 or 32 or 33 years old. You've gone to medical school. You got a PhD. You had fellowships, residencies, internships. And now you're ready for your own laboratory, and there's no money. It's very easy to make the decision to go into industry, family practice, and give up your basic research. But if we can greet you at that time and give you your own laboratory and get the institution to match for $100,000 a year for 3 years, you've changed the career. And whether it's in our Melanoma Research Alliance, or whether it's in our Faster Cures group for all life-threatening diseases, or whether it's in the Prostate Cancer Foundation, if we have 25 young scientists, and they each are going to work for 40 years, by funding them at $2.5 million for the first year, and each year, you've bought 1,000 years of their time. And when I look back over the 30 years to all these new therapies that have been created, you will find a young scientist, a young person there. It's very interesting. At the National Institutes of Health, the first age that you get an award is 43. If you look at who's won Nobel Prizes in science, most people have won for an idea they had when they were within a few years of school. James Watson was in his 20s when he put forth this idea that we have genes, etc. You know, so many, Einstein, I think, was 23. And so the idea that you're going to school and you're studying and you've now spent 15 years after high school, and now we're going to tell you can wait another 12 years. It's ridiculous. And so the system really was not prepared for the fact that we needed to get the best and brightest and divert their careers younger. And so I have spent more than 30 years working on this, the same thing we had worked on 40 years ago with educators to try to get them to stay as an educator. When you go to India today, people are so confused today that think India is like China. There were 23 or 24 million children born last year in India. There were 9 to 10 million born in China, more than twice as many children. Today, there are more than 200 million more children in India than in China. China is more advanced digitally, but there's very few countries where the competition for education, you know today, is more significant. And they also have a belief in healthcare, not based on modern technology, but 5,000 years of anecdotal experience. So yes, our theories that your gut have been proven to be true with modern sequencing technologies. And this year, they've just approved giving the microbiome of one person who responded well to treatment to another person that didn't respond well, admitting that because they have a different gut, they're going to respond well, and how their genes are expressed or how the therapy they're given is going to be expressed differently. But in India, you had 5,000 years of experience of if you did this, that happened. And when I went to the northern Amazon, northwest Amazon, here I am dressed head to toe, and I wrote about it, all in black. And our Indian guide has a pair of shorts on, and that's it. He's immune to everything. I'm not immune to anything. And he takes me over and he says, well, we use this bush against malaria, and we use this for this. And he shows me this, and he says, if we ever get separated, you can hack this bush and drink the water inside. But then he goes and he tells me, but don't drink the water in this bush, it could kill you. So they both look the same to me. Okay, both of them. So I got a rope and we tied it around his waist and my waist so we would never be separated as we were hacking through the jungle. And so I think the world today is adjusting to what have we learned over thousands of years that we didn't take in consideration. And the environmental movement, the effort here in healthy human, healthy planet, is totally interrelated.
Absolutely. What have you found as your, I guess, the things that you're most happy about that prove to you the research is going in the right direction? What are you pointing towards as successes or solutions?
Well, let's just talk about two that the world has full knowledge of. HIV/AIDS, the #1 talk show host, not the #1 healthcare podcast in the world. In 1987, Oprah Winfrey goes on television and tells the people of America that 1 in 5 are going to die from AIDS in the next 3 years. That's based on her work. Well, unfortunately, many people died, but we didn't have 80 million people die. We had tens of thousands. And the cocktails and the antivirals that were created. So when one of the most popular people in the United States, Magic Johnson, announced in 1991 that he was diagnosed with HIV and he's going to have to retire at his peak of his career from the NBA, most people, including myself, thought he might not make it. Today, he's a friend. He's participated in our Faster Cures effort. He's bigger than life. His smile is bigger than life. It's 32 years later. Where do we see it the most when you say where are the results? Look at sub-Saharan Africa. 2/3 of everyone with HIV and AIDS lived in sub-Saharan Africa. If you wanted to go work there, they wanted you to work. 30 years ago, they paid you combat pay out of fear that you could be infected. Well, today, the chance of a woman with proper care passing AIDS on to her children is 2%, down from 95%. So the population of sub-Saharan Africa is growing. Children that were orphans are no longer born with HIV. People with HIV and AIDS are living today, not dying. And what did we just see in the last 3 years during COVID? The leaders in the state that you and I are in today, California, told Californians that 1 in 2 Californians are going to get the disease in the next 3 months. And that 5 million of people in California will have to be hospitalized, but there's only a few 100,000 hospital beds. It was a catastrophe. More than 1 million people died in America, more than 10 or 20 million worldwide. But it wasn't 50% of the population. It wasn't 10% of the population. And it was only 63 days between the sequencing of the virus and the first human being getting a vaccine. 63 days, 9 weeks, not 10 years. And so that is why I wrote the book. Okay, I wrote the book because we are on the verge of a total revolution, the same as I saw in finance, in healthcare today, with technology. And so it's time to put your foot on the accelerator and go faster, not time to ease up because we think we have put into suspended animation this pandemic. And so that was my concern. There were these points of the March in 98. There was this point of the celebration of science in 2012. And there's a point here today that people don't have to die. For the first time in history, we have a good chance to cure your disease in your own lifetime if we stay with it.
Mike, how can me and my community support these efforts? How can people be involved? How can people be engaged if they feel inspired by what you're doing and the work that you're leading on? How can they get involved? Because I think that's often, what you're sharing is a healthier future, which I think we all want. But naturally, people get discouraged because of headlines and news and everything that we see around us. There's a lot of
things that aren't true that are in the headlines.
Yeah.
So just the concept of healthy human, healthy planet. Such a large percent of the earth today is devoted to raising animals, 70 to 80 billion animals for humans to eat. And that doesn't count the billions of fish. We are on the verge of essentially being able to create a hamburger without a calf, without a cow. Now, for a person in India who doesn't eat a hamburger, it doesn't make any difference. Okay, but if we can grow it in a laboratory and just give it light and energy and nutrients, we don't have to go through the whole process of all the water required, all the land required to grow physical animals. So yes, we can grow food in a laboratory. And now it has just been approved to allow this to occur. We needed to get the cost down. It used to be $30,000 an ounce, then it went to $3,000, now it's a few hundred. But it's only a matter of time where we can have a substantial change in the planet. A friend of mine put up the money to do a book called Drawdown. And Drawdown listed the 20 major factors that were changing our atmosphere and the environment the earth is in. 10 of them relate to food. 10 of them relate to other things. And so we have a chance, and the environmental movement combined with the health movement. Science today can show you what happens. So we know today that what were all these vegetables on the planet for if you believe in Darwin? What's the purpose of broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts? These things are little Pac-Man. They're out there eating, carcinogens in your body. We've learned today that your immune system can do amazing things. And I wrote about it when I first heard Jim Allison talk in 1997, that your immune system is smarter than all the scientists in the room. But someone turned off your immune system. And that's why you got a life-threatening disease. And that occurred. And so he developed and won a Nobel Prize for the concept of checkpoint inhibitors. And we financed his work for 10 years in prostate cancer. It wasn't that effective. But the minute we moved to melanoma, the death rate has dropped by 50%. And so what he did is we turned off the switch in the cancer that turned off your immune system. The idea of growing your own organs. There are now people that have had organ transplants from others take these drugs to prevent rejection by their own immune system. Well, at Mass General in Boston and other things, there looks like there's now a technology that you can input to a certain degree the immune system of the person that donates your organ to you, so you'll have two immune systems. So when you get that organ, you don't need rejection. Your immune systems will be operating. So technology is just moving. Non-invasive surgery. When I watched Star Trek as a kid, the Dr. Bones, he didn't do any invasive surgery. He put a little thing on your body and it did everything. Well, that's what non-invasive focus ultrasound can do. So the promise is with us today. And so we're just trying to get a mission here going to make sure we stay with our efforts, that the world mobilized. When you look at what happened in the months of COVID, one, I came back and told everyone at every one of our centers that we will all be judged by what we did during this period of time. Didn't want to compete with you, but we launched podcasts, 125 of them. And the reason I launched them was threefold. One, if I'm talking to Francis Collins, the head of the NIH, I want you or anyone else to hear what he's saying. Anyone in the world could listen. I might be able to talk to the CEO of Alex Gorski at J&J. Most of the people couldn't, but you can listen to the conversation. Two, by talking to them, I can encourage them maybe to take action they wouldn't have taken. So when I first spoke to Alex Gorski in April on this podcast, he was talking about maybe going into clinical trials in January of 21. And so my comment was, why not July? Which he ended up doing, and it was approved by January. And so the third effort was to see how people were coping. So if I talked to the largest employers in the world, who had employees all over the world, what were they doing in China, Italy, etc., that you might be doing in the United States? If you were responsible for thousands or tens of thousands, or in the case of a Walmart, millions of employees, what are you going to be doing? And when I spoke to the CEO of Target, he told me that he was protecting their employees. But what happened was when people who lived in small living units, apartments, came into the store with their kids, the kids were running all over the store. And so how are you going to protect the kids and how are you going to protect your workers? And so this had to be done in a short period of time. Today, I'm no longer doing podcasts. I'm deferring to you to tell the world. But for me, I meditated. It made a big difference, I think, in my outcome. I went to the leaders in immunology in the world, and I discovered the smell of the seashore and the smell of certain kind of trees, sequoia, cedar trees, seemed to energize my immune system. And so when we think of the senses, smell, taste, touch, all of these come into play in rejuvenating your body. So I used to sit at high tide and smell the seashore. Why did that energize my immune system? I have no idea, except we came out of the sea. So maybe that was returning to the sea. And the smell of the pine needles and things like that, maybe it was relating when I was young with my father. So I don't know, but my view was we don't use all of our senses. And we understand one of the things that Ayurveda brought me was understanding of so many different elements of touch. So I had a chance to see things that I never thought I would see in my life. I visited a man in China, doctor, who was over 90 years old, and he told me if he came out of the mountains, he would die. But when he put his hands on me, he could create such unbelievable heat. How did he do that? I have no idea. Okay? But it gave you a chance to experiencing different things. And just like the two young men from Australia who challenged conventional wisdom, and the first reaction was, they didn't even go to a good university. Why should we be listening to them? And then a few years later, everybody accepts it. And so I've found these similarities in my life, whether it was in finance, whether it was in public health, whether it's in medical research. But it all comes back to the people on your team. So when I was in India, if India's playing Pakistan in cricket, nothing else is going on, okay? They could be arguing and fighting about anything, but you have to take time out for that game. And so there are things that focus your attention. And part of this effort is this concept of healthy human, healthy planet. Yes, technology has solved so many problems for us. But I think what I've tried to do, particularly in the last 30 years, I've gone from an extremely unhealthy diet, okay, to an extreme for the first 9 years. I got my Ayurveda massages twice a week for 9 years. And so I was willing to do things that I would have scoffed at in the 1970s, 60s, 80s as way out there. Okay, but today I'm visiting with you today. I'm the happiest guy to do a podcast with you. 30 years later, because I changed. The world changed. And going forward, we're going to have to make more changes, more adoption of things. It's very hard. It's very hard. In the United States today, we now have this, quote, diabetes pill that apparently controls your appetite and your weight. Okay, so
Ozempic, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier than having personal discipline. For me, I ate more hot dogs, I believe, than anyone except those people that win the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. And how we can eat 50 to 60 hot dogs and buns in that short period of time, I have no idea. But no hot dog was worth your life. But not everyone. And what I found, most people don't want to be lectured on their diet or what they should eat or not eat. And when you discover things like a Nobel Prize winner, Elizabeth Blackburn, about what sugar does to you. So what happened when Mexico put a tax on sugar or Chile put a tax on? They increased their advertising as sales fell off. And the same thing occurs. Unfortunately, the developing world is subject to this advertisement and these addicted foods and drugs as they move around the world. In China, literally no one had diabetes 40 years ago. You didn't even study it in school. And now, people in China have the most number of people with diabetes in the world.
And there's no way of regulating that at a government level or there's no way, because I agree with you. I mean, I think that we're all now becoming more and more aware of the amount of sugar in sugary drinks, the amount of unhealthy fats and carbohydrates, the amount of, whatever it may be, or the amount of artificial, even in, speaking of plant-based foods, even the current plant-based, foods, they're not all healthy either. So is there no way to make sure that at a higher level that we don't even get access to this? Or is it just a discipline conversation?
No, I think we will be there. The idea that you can take a calf, a cell from a calf, not a calf, but a cell. If we can find an animal that never was shot with hormones, more than 50% of all the drugs. are shot into animals. So you might think that you're healthy and you're not taking things, but what you ate did. And so, but I think we'll have an entirely new food chain in 20 to 30 years. If you look at companies, the market has adjusted. And I wrote about it in the book. So at one time, Kraft was selling between $90 and $100 a share. I don't know where it is today. Call it 35 to 40.
Wow.
Nestle announced that they were going to become a health company. What was the market reaction, social media reaction? First, they give you diabetes. Then they're going to deal with it. They're 360. They create their own problems, etc. So Nestle went out and hired a CEO, not from the consumer packaging, but a CEO who had worked in healthcare. And they sold their candy business in the United States. They sold other businesses, and they focused here on healthy businesses, etc. And Nestle has flourished. So the market is willing to pay more for that. And yes, the first iterations of plant-based diet to make it taste, we don't know if they're any better with all the ingredients they put in. But the ability to grow, the same as your ability, today we can take your skin stem cell, turn it back to the day you were born and tell it it's now a heart stem cell. It's you. And then give it energy, light, energy, nutrients. And you can see today in a little petri dish, these cells beating like they're a heart. And so we'll be able to create pure foods, not contaminate the planet in the future. And so this is what technology's promise is. And that, once again, that's why I wrote the book. You're busy, I'm busy. It's not easy to write the book. You've just finished a tour of more than 40 cities in the world on your new book. And so it's not easy to take the time. The analogy I have made is there was this show in the United States called I Love Lucy. And Lucille Ball was packaging chocolates that coming down the line. And they were coming down faster than she could pack them. So she's putting them here, she's putting them in her mouth and everything. What are you going to do? So my life and your life, there's plenty of things we're focused on. I've probably given 50 speeches in the last month. But to set the time down was my concern here that we have a chance. Technology has given us a chance for the solution for all these life-threatening diseases. We estimate there's 10,000 life-threatening diseases that our Center for Faster Cures has looked at. And there's solutions for 500. So there's a lot of work to do. And we are on the verge with the use of technology